Hey, folks. Today's episode sponsored by one of my favorite sponsors, SunsetLakeSebede.com. And now that it's officially fall, our farmer friends at SunsetLakeSebede.com are busy in their fields in full harvest mode right now. They're literally out there cutting and hanging fresh hemp flower in their drying rooms, getting the new crop ready for release later this year. They could very well be listening to the program as they are drying this stuff. And while they're busy doing all the hard work, you get to reap the rewards. From now until the 28th, you can grab any of their smokable hemp products for 40% off with the code FlowerPower25. All one word, FlowerPower25. The 25 is the numbers 2 and 5. That's 40%. Doesn't matter whether you're trying to relax without the, extra high part, or if you want to cut back on tobacco, or maybe just, stretch the other stuff a little bit longer. I know somebody who does that. It's called, what was the name of that? There's a name for that. Entourage effect. That's what it is. Anyways, they've got keef, they've got flour, they've got pre-rolls. I myself am an enjoyer of the pre-roll occasionally on the weekend. But they have all sorts of other great Sebede products. But right now is the time to get that flour. Head over to SunsetLakeSebede.com. Use the code FlowerPower25, as in 2025. FlowerPower25 to save 40% on all their sun-grown flour pre-rolls and even vapor
cartridges?
Yeah.
Whew.
Yep. It's Monday. Sale ends September 28th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. See their site for terms and conditions. And now, time for the show.
Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, September 22nd, 2025. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Professor Amanda Frost, Professor of Immigration and Citizenship Law at the University of Virginia, author of You Are Not American, Citizenship Stripping from Dred Scott to the Dreamers. Also on the program, speaking of citizenship stripping, ICE head Tom Homan took a $50,000 cash bribe delivered to him in a
Kava
fast
bag.
food bag.
High end.
To influence the Trump administration. And then Trump's DOJ quashed the investigation. Meanwhile, Trump directs a supposed independent Attorney General Pam Bondi to prosecute his enemies. This, as a federal prosecutor quits over pressure to charge Letitia James. Meanwhile, back on the Capitol Hill, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries demand Trump negotiate before the government shutdown at the end of this week. And if not, they will demand it again.
Wow.
That would be 2 demands. U.S. to offer all options to help salvage Argentinian economy wrecked by Javier Milei. Trump regime kills U.S. hunger reports. That way, the hunger goes away. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics on Friday delays its inflation-related report. UN convenes in New York as Britain, Canada, Australia, Portugal recognize a Palestinian state over the weekend, France and others to follow suit as Israel continues to level Gaza. Meanwhile, over the weekend, the Congressional Progressive Caucus endorsed a bill to block offensive weapons to Israel. Meanwhile, the White House is in disarray over its new H-1B visas policy as rural hospitals face massive medical staff exodus. Also over the weekend, Trump hands TikTok over to a cabal of right-wing oligarchs as pro-Palestinian posts are purged. And lastly, desperate to deliver on an autism cause, RFK Jr. is set to blame acetaminophen. All this and much, much more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us at the beginning of this incredibly busy week. Emma Vigland here.
Hello.
Recovering from a... we won't even talk about what happened to the Giants. A lot of people are saying things, but I'm not going to say anything about the Giants' loss.
How magnanimous of you.
A lot of people are saying things, but I'm not going to.
Good. You're going to dance right next to me as I cry, basically. That's kind of what we're thinking of.
Well,
here.
we'll play that clip later.
First of all, how dare you?
I want to say something about this autism Tylenol or acetaminophen connection. I think it was about 2 years ago, and I don't know. I may be repeating myself because about a month ago there was a court case, and I think at that time I had said something. I certainly intended to. I may have forgotten. But 2 years ago, I interviewed an attorney at the torts conference that I attend annually or twice annually. I'm going to be going again in October. And he was pursuing a case of that claimed a connection between autism and mothers who took excessive amounts of Tylenol while pregnant. And I am quite sure at that time I was very careful in telling people, like, this is an early case. This stuff needs to be adjudicated. There is no indication that it's real at this instance. But I've also been involved with, a lot of these cases in their early stages that turn out to be, quite important to let people know about. About a month ago, this case hit the a New York a federal court. I believe it was the Eastern District off the top of my head. And the case was dismissed by the judge. They had brought it together in a multi-district litigation. This is different from a class action. Multi-district means that the class here it's not a classic class action. It's called a mass tort. And the difference being that the harm is different for everybody, but the cause is the same. Whereas a class action, the harm is similar. So for instance, like the big C8 case was a mass tort because some people got cancer from C8. Some people got gastrointestinal problems. Some people got different types of cancer, et cetera, et cetera. Apparently, Trump and RFK Jr. are going to announce that there's some type of connection between acetaminophen and autism. The case, the claim is likely based upon a paper by Andrea Bassarelli, which was an overall sort of like a paper on all of the studies that have been done in the past. This person has been a paid expert in other plaintiff lawsuits alleging this link. But in this this litigation, it was the Southern District of New York, Judge Denise Cote excluded Bocciarelli and other plaintiff experts from testifying under what is known as the Daubert standard, where a judge in these instances can measure the credibility of these expert witnesses or the expert studies. The judge found methodological flaws in their scientific analysis and concluded their testimony lacked sufficient reliability and scientific merit to establish causation in court. And so that case was basically rejected. And so to the extent that there is any even association with Tylenol and or acetaminophen and pregnancy, there are two things you should know. The studies that have shown any type of association at this point get not causation, just association, not even quite necessarily correlation. But those studies, when they have been redone controlling for siblings, that cause or association goes away. Now, again, also, there may be other things that are associated with taking acetaminophen that may also be a factor in terms of autism. Like, for instance, if you have a very severe fever and you take Tylenol, it's possible that it could be the fever, or it could be the thing that gave you the fever. I mean, and I'm not implying that fevers or that stuff, causes autism. I don't know.
But it could be a health issue.
But the point being that just because you see, you could also say, well, a lot of those women were wearing pants. And, that's also correlated. But there has been no discernible massive increase in the use of Tylenol by people over the course of the past 30 years, when supposedly the incidence of autism has risen as opposed to diagnoses.
Exactly.
So folks should be aware of that as this comes out. It remains to be seen what the Trump administration is going to do with this, other than to supposedly offer some type of directive or who knows what. But we shall see. But I wanted to mention that at the top of the show. Now let's get to what I think should be a massive story. But of course, nobody will be talking about it in 24 hours, I imagine. Tom Homan, the head of ICE, I don't know what I guess he's the Border Czar.
Yeah.
Last year in 2024, September, actually almost to the day, September 20th, 2024, hidden cameras were set up by the FBI. They were actually investigating somebody bigger than Tom Homan. We don't know who this is. And a federal investigation was launched in Western Texas in the summer of 2024 after a subject in a separate investigation claimed Homan was soliciting payments in exchange for awarding contracts should Trump win the presidential election. You'll recall, certainly by the fall, but over the summer, Tom Homan was marched out every other day by the Trump administration and was saying, I'm going to come back and I'm going to be the ICE head and I'm going to deport all sorts of people. I mean, he was bragging about it. And I think he was even named by Trump in like a shadow cabinet. I don't know if it was at this point, but this is according to an internal Justice Department summary of the probe reviewed by MSNBC and people familiar with the case. The U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of Texas, working with the FBI, asked the Justice Department's Public Integrity Section to join in its ongoing probe, quote, into the Border Czar and former acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Tom Homan, and others, based on evidence of payment from an FBI undercover agent in exchange for facilitating future contracts related to border enforcement. they have hidden video camera recordings. Now, I understand it, like there'd be some room if it was just audio, because it's Tom Homan, and it's, here's your 50 grand.
Could have been Holman, could have been a garbage disposal.
Exactly. Undercover FBI agents posing as contractors communicated and met several times last summer with a business colleague who introduced them to Homan, and with Homan himself, who indicated he would facilitate securing contracts for them in exchange for money once he was in office. This is according to documents and the people familiar with the case. Let's play and then when Trump filled in, FBI agents and department prosecutors took no further steps in the final months of 2024. What were the final months of 2024 were after Donald Trump gets elected. And several federal FBI and Justice Department agents believed they had a strong criminal case against Homan for conspiracy to commit bribery based on videotaping him accepting cash and his apparent promise to assist in contracts, according to 4 people familiar with the probe. Homan could have been charged with a crime then, legal experts say, but his case was unusual. He was not a public official, and Trump was not president at the time he accepted money in the FBI's undercover sting. So his actions didn't clearly fit under a standard bribery charge. That's interesting, because here is Tom Homan. Well, what's the date on this? November
11th.
Okay, which would be a full week after Trump is elected. And surely people in the DOJ who knew that Trump was coming in would have at that point alerted Homan to, hey, man, there's videotapes of you taking cash, saying that
bag.
if you become, if you work for Trump, you're going to help them out. So maybe you should make it clear that you're just an average
Funny
dude.
choice of words.
Yes.
Make it clear.
To the extent that you can articulate it, you're just an average dude.
Let me be clear. I don't work for the campaign. I haven't taken a dollar from the campaign. Tom Homan's doing it because I think he's the greatest president of my lifetime. I want to see him back in the White House.
Third person.
Nobody says Tom Homan's working for the campaign. Tom Homan is working for the campaign. Tom Homan's working in the interest of the campaign. Tom Homan doesn't employed by the campaign. In interest, I'm doing it because Tom Homan, retired ice director, the guy spent 3.5 decades doing his job. I want him to be president. I'll do what I can to help him. That's what it is.
Now,
he doth protest a little bit too much. I'm doing this out of the goodness of my heart, not just because I think that if he gets into office, he will drop this case.
He's making it clear that he has no association with them at that time, which makes the bribery charge harder to pin because he doesn't have the ability to do. He's getting paid on a hypothetical. This is like an if-come bribe, if you will. It is still a crime, however, for anyone to seek money to improperly influence federal contracts, the legal expert said, and whether they are a public official or not, or whether they ever delivered on their promise or not. If someone who is not yet a public official but expects to take bribes in exchange for agreeing to take official acts after they're appointed, they can't be charged with bribery, said Randall Eliason, former chief of public corruption. But they can be charged with conspiracy to commit bribery. In a conspiracy charge, the crime is the agreement to commit a criminal act in the future. And so what Homan's doing in that instance is trying to make it clear, like, I'm in no way affiliated with them. So I'm just out here doing this for the sake of like any other citizen. I love Donald Trump, et cetera, et cetera.
I'm like one of you in the crowd.
Try and guess who is in charge at the DOJ of shutting this down. Think of the DOJ officials who have been in the Trump administration, who, and you can name a name, who is the most despicable and has shown that they are completely, they They don't care about justice in any measure or form. Who do you think it was? There's not many names we know about from the Trump DOJ at this point. Mm-hmm. Beauvais or Bovee. The guy who was in there to bribe Eric Adams, the guy who was in there who said, we don't listen to the courts, and the guy that the Republicans just appointed and nominated and confirmed to be a federal judge.
And
he was in charge in February or late January or February 2025. Former acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Bovee was briefed on the case and told the Justice Department official he didn't support the investigation, according to people familiar with the case.
And the through line with the Eric Adams thing and Beauvais and Holman is using the threat of prosecution as a way to keep people working for you in line and on message and doing what you need them to do. We've talked about this before about the Pete Hegseth allegations. Trump sees people's pasts that may have some, shady elements to it as assets. Because the number one test for his administration's loyalty, it's not competence. Totally. So if you have blackmail over someone, why is Tom Homan going out there on every Sunday, every night, media hits selling the Trump administration's agenda? It's because he owes them.
And to be fair, though, he also, I think, is a unreconstructed racist.
I've agreed.
So it's probably can be both things.
Definitely.
He just wants you to know.
It's called synergy.
I like it. It works both ways. Good stuff, Tom.
Anyway, get it in a potato chip bag next time.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. Can't you get like something that looks like
Well, that's
a briefcase is too obvious. No one will.
How about just hand him an envelope?
If you hand Tom a large pizza box, no one will think twice about it.
But that's what the FBI. That was their ploy, the Cava bag, and we just want to give you some lunch here in this Texas.
Yeah, he was like, it was actually $100,000, but I ate half of it before I realized it was money.
I had no idea. I had no idea. All right. In a moment, we're going to be talking to Amanda Frost. She is a professor of immigration and citizenship law at the University of Virginia, author of You Are Not American, Citizenship Stripping from Dred Scott to the Dreamers. But first, a couple of words from our sponsor. One is Cozy Earth. And Cozy Earth products bring ultimate comfort that shows up day in, day out. Cozy Earth nailed comfort with their bamboo joggers and their everywhere pant next level. I wore my Cozy Earth hoodie to work today. Same material as the jogger. I have the jogger as well. They are incredibly soft, but also structured. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Does that make honestly?
Yes, it does.
Because
make
that's
sense.
the thing. I can't really figure out like what it is I like about them, but they're very soft. But they feel like they're not like.
Well, you need a little structure if you're wearing it outside the house. You can't just have
exactly. But even the sweatshirt, even the hoodie is more structured, but it's also very soft. The thing I love about the hoodie and the jogger is the exact same way. It keeps you warm, but it feels cool. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. That's why they're your softest all-season staple wardrobe, whether you're staying in or stepping out. They also have something called the Everywhere Pant, which is basically you can wear the pant in any type of situation.
Right.
It's comfortable, but it also looks sort of structured. I'm onto something here.
Does that make sense?
Yes. The concept of athleisure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we didn't have that when I was a kid.
Yeah, got it.
The epitome of refined comfort and adaptability. Your new go-to pant effortlessly blends breathability and flexibility, allowing you to embrace movement on the go. And, the sheets, they don't have that in this thing, but the sheets are also the exact same way. Mm-hmm. They keep you warm, but you feel cool.
Agreed. I have the duvet.
I'm excited about it when I talk about it. So
I understand.
I want to thank Cozy Earth for sponsoring this episode. Go to CozyEarth.com and use my code Majority Report for up to 40% off the best pants, joggers, shirts, everything. And if you get a post-purchase survey, tell them you heard about Cozy Earth right here. Built for real life, made to keep up with yours, Cozy Earth. Also, oh yeah, this is big in my life right now too. Fall is here. I always try and start off fall by like making meals for Saul because he's back to school, that type of thing. And that lasts like 5 minutes because I'm like, I can't I go to the supermarket, HelloFresh is a huge boon to my ability to make, I also work in Factor, which I think is from the same company, but HelloFresh is one of those services that send seasonal ingredients right to your door. And this season, they've taken things to the next level with their biggest menu refresh yet. Say hello to a whole new way to dinner. Want to thank HelloFresh for supporting the Majority Report and making it possible for me to cook a home-cooked meal, but making it much, much easier. And the best thing about, right now, you get 10 free meals plus a free item for life at HelloFresh.com/majority10FM. That's majority 10 FM. The best thing that I like about this, there's two things. One is the meals take very little time you can find. They have a huge menu, but you can find meals that will take like 15 minutes, 20 minutes tops. Super easy. You don't have to have gone to, knife cutting school to prepare these meals. But the other thing I really like is they have straightforward stuff, but they have a lot of stuff that is like more interesting that I can get Saul to eat, like this it's a beef bowl on rice with sriracha and sesame, and then I made some pork tacos, and so the meals are interesting and he eats them. Then also like the straightforward, like they had a quesadilla. But HelloFresh has doubled its menu. You can choose now from 100 options each week, including new seasonal dishes and recipes from around the world. There you go. Dig into bigger portions, keeping everybody satisfied. That's the other thing that's great about this. The waste is minimal. So you don't have to go and figure out, like I don't have to buy more cilantro than I need. Feel great with an even healthier menu filled with high protein and veggie-packed recipes. HelloFresh now helps you eat greener with veggie-packed recipes that have 2 or more veggies. Get steak and seafood recipes delivered every week for no extra cost. There's 3 times more seafood on the menu now at no extra cost. Discover new seasonal produce each week, from snap peas to stone fruit to corn on the cob and more. The best way to cook just got better. Go to HelloFresh.com/majority10FM, all one word, now to get 10 free meals and a free item for life. 1 per box with active subscription. Free meals applied as discount on the first box. New subscribers only. Varies by plan. That's HelloFresh.com/majority10FM to get 10 free meals and a free item for life. Check the podcast and YouTube description, and we'll give you the links and the codes there as well. Quick break. Amanda Frost, professor of immigration and citizenship law at the University of Virginia, author of You Are Not American, Citizenship Stretching from Dred Scott to the Dreamers. We'll be right back. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. I want to welcome back to the program. It was 2012. It was during the ACA decision, or I should say oral arguments maybe. Amanda Frost, professor of immigration and citizenship law at the University of Virginia and author of You Are Not American, Citizenship Stripping from Dred Scott to the Dreamers. Professor, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into the specifics, because, sort of this more or less historical a trip through the various ways in which citizenship was redefined or undefined, et cetera. Like what, over the course of the 200 and some odd years that we're covering here, what is the overarching theme? Is it the malleability of citizenship, or how citizenship or expatriation is weaponized?
I think all of those things, overarching theme is that the fight is never over. that there's always been this push-pull back forth between people who want to define America in an exclusionary, with an exclusionary definition that usually limits people based on lineage and ancestry, and others who say, no, that's antithetical to the values on which our nation was founded. And this book runs through that history, and it is a long and troubling history of denying citizenship to groups and individuals, often on the basis of race, but also on the basis of ideology and gender. U.S. citizen women, native-born women who married non-citizens, lost their citizenship for a 20-year period. So it is all of those things. And as we see today, the contest is never completely over. We're never fully done with our debates over who is an American.
Is it, I guess maybe you just answered that question, but is it a coincidence that there's never been a systemic denial of citizenship to white men?
Yeah, well, yeah. So what's really interesting to me about citizenship is all of the different facets of citizenship. So citizenship is a set of, we think of it today as very much about political rights. Like all citizens can vote who are over 18, except for felons in some states, serve on juries, serve in federal and state office. But citizenship is more than just those legal rights. Of course, also, I should add the very important legal right to enter and remain in the United States, more important today than ever. But citizenship is also about a sense of belonging. And I will say that all white men have not always had political rights. In fact, you had to have property to be able to vote. And some non-citizens who were wealthy and propertied could vote when U.S. native-born men who were considered citizens couldn't because they didn't own property. But I will say that I think white men were always accepted as rightly belonging in the United States. And Chief Justice Taney, of course, said that in Dred Scott. And that's the backdrop, the background to our birthright citizenship principle, a reaction against Dred Scott to say everyone born here is a citizen, whatever the color of their skin, religion, or the immigration status of their parents.
When you say born here, I mean, it's also, I would imagine, intrinsically linked with immigration. And when there were those periods of contraction, when there were quotas, I mean, who got to come here in the 20th century to expressly racialize. But immigration, how is it connected to immigration in the United States in like the 20th century and 21st century?
Yeah, so the book that we began by speaking about, which I published a couple of years ago, and You Are Not American, about citizenship stripping, and it's now current again, I'm sad to say. So that book gives the history of citizenship stripping. But I'm writing a book about something that I think is worth celebrating, which is the history of birthright citizenship added to our Constitution in 1868. And so that book is forthcoming. And the last third of that book will address the fact that, just as you said, Emma, the birthright citizenship guarantee that said if you're born in the U.S., you're a citizen, then brought with it all of these fights over immigration. Because, of course, in order for someone to be born a citizen, they have to have a parent, a mother, actually, physically present in the U.S. when they're born, right, for that birthright citizenship principle to apply. So you're absolutely right. Our debates over citizenship start with our debates over immigration. Who should be allowed to become an American? And I should add, of course, that you can also naturalize. So people who are born outside the U.S., non-citizens, can come to the U.S. and become citizens through a naturalization process. The U.S. has generally been, making it difficult to come to the U.S. If you're here and legal, you can get citizenship more easily than in many countries. And that's another way in which immigrants have powered our economy and our society in a very beneficial way for the United States.
I wanted to get to this later, but I'll ask you now, and then maybe we can go back and go through some of like the Dred Scott and through Reconstruction and suffragettes. But how durable is naturalization? Like, I mean, I think like up until maybe a couple of months ago, my sense was if you're a naturalized citizen, you're in. It's locked in. That's like you can't reverse that. But it sounds like the Trump administration feels like you can reverse that. So just walk us through from a legal perspective, like how durable is naturalization?
Yeah, and that was the impetus for the book, You Are Not American, published now in the midst of Trump 1, because I was watching the Trump administration declare that naturalized citizen status was at risk. And that was as shocking to me as it seems like it was to you. And I'm a professor of citizenship and immigration law. So I researched the history. That's what this book does in part. And it turns out we did have a history in the United States in the first half of the 20th century of taking away citizenship from naturalized citizens because of their political views. It was part of the Cold War era. Because of their race, there were people who were naturalized, who were Arabic or who were South Asian, and the US Supreme Court and the executive branch said, wait, you weren't supposed to become a citizen. We weren't supposed to allow you to naturalize. We had racial limitations on naturalization in this country until the 1950s. So people lost their citizenship based on race, based on ideology. Women lost their citizenship, whether naturalized or born US citizens, if they married a non-citizen. So that was the first half of the 20th century. But then the Supreme Court did away with that in 1967. It said we should almost never denaturalize people, only for some kind of fraud or error in the naturalization process. No other reason is good enough. You can choose to leave the nation and leave your citizenship, but the government can't take it away from you. And then that brought us to the first Trump administration, where they very explicitly said, this isn't like my spin on it, this is what they said in memos, Jeff Sessions, Attorney General, among others, we're going to use denaturalization as a tool of immigration enforcement. And we're going to go after people, even if there's inadvertent error, as some were. And they tried to denaturalize people on a grand scale, a broad scale. They did start a number of investigations, but they failed to do it in any broad, mass, systematic way, in part because courts have to be involved, and that slows everyone down. But they're ramping up again. And of course, this is, again, part of the immigration crackdown, is not just to send away immigrants, undocumented immigrants or illegal immigrants, but also to take away citizenship and deport people.
It's interesting that you mentioned that period, too, just because there was that piece in Rolling Stone about Stephen Miller, and Trump had asked the question, who's my Roy Cohn, right? Miller, one, has for you say Jeff Sessions, he was a staffer under Sessions. Two, he has an obsession with the Immigration Act of 1924 and wants to return to the period of racial quotas, which was in part used to justify turning away boats of Jews fleeing the Holocaust during that time period. And that has been kind of, with him acting like the president, basically being the shadow president, that's been their policy goal, is to return to that period that you're talking about there.
Yeah, and the 1924 Immigration Act, as you just correctly said, was very much about racial quotas. That's what the enactors of that law said as they enacted it. In this country in these cyclical ways, and it's often based on race, but not entirely. And Irish immigrants came to the U.S. in the middle of the 19th century. They were vilified. They were racialized as the other. Italian immigrants were the same. Then, of course, we've moved on today to other groups from, South America, groups from Asia. But it's just worth noting, this has been something historically we've done, and we've had cyclical waves of xenophobia followed by embracing immigrants. Yes, this is part of Stephen Miller's plan. The fact that he's opposed to all immigration except white South Afrikaners, I think, tells you everything you need to know about him. And I will just add finally that I do think we need to take a hard look at immigration policy. I'm not a fan of open borders. I think we need to have limits. The question is what kind of limits, and that is really a question about what kind of nation we are. And the final point there I'll say is immigrants power our economy and our nation, and that has never been so obvious as now. And I predict in a couple of decades, we're going to be competing with other nations for immigrants. And if we could be losing that race right now. Canada, for example, is building on our immigration system to try to entice people who've been approved for visas here, H-1B visas in the U.S., to come to Canada. And many are taking that offer.
Oh, I think, the number of foreign students is down. I think we're going to be desperate. In the event that we're in a position to articulate it as a country, we're going to be desperate for immigration, I think, a lot sooner than a decade or two. But there's two things I want to get to what you mean by open borders. But before we get there, is there anything that the Trump administration is doing in terms of immigration that is novel relative to what they attempted during their first administration? Because, I think there is a general sense like, oh, they're going much further this time. But is that the case, or are they just more competent and have planned this out with their time off? Like the idea that there were denaturalization during the first round of Trump administration, I think has been lost. And now we just see them doing it in a more methodical way. Is that what's happening, or is there something that's novel?
I wouldn't call them more competent. I might say more brazen. Look, the goal, and it was clear from the beginning, I was listening to Stephen Miller speak publicly before the election and in the run up to the taking office. And basically the goal is get the courts out of it, or have the courts be yes men to the degree possible. Because what slows down this administration and Trump 1 in deporting non-citizens, and by the way, it wasn't successful. It didn't deport that many people in Trump 1 or stop people from coming across the border. And what they said the problem was courts and due process, the requirement that people have a hearing and opportunity to be heard before they can be removed. So that's their goal, to get rid of that. And are they more competent? I wouldn't say they're more competent. They're losing in court, but they are going to, lower courts cannot hold the line for that long, and Congress is not speaking up. So to the degree that they are attempting to deport people without due process, for example, by claiming we're being invaded by Venezuela under the Alien Enemies Act, not true, we're not under invasion. But to the degree they're making those kinds of claims, eventually they will prevail in getting people removed from the United States because lower courts, district court judges cannot hold the line for years.
How I asked you how I guess durable naturalized citizen. How durable is non-naturalized citizenship? Like, I mean, yours or mine. As I mean, I was born here. My parents were, American citizens. But is there a world in which they get to say, you know what, you've lost your citizenship?
Yeah, well, Rosie O'Donnell has some experience of this since Trump threatened to take away her citizenship. And she's a birthright citizen. So I'll say, first of all, that for those naturalized citizens who are listening, the Trump administration has tried to denaturalize people and investigate, but has yet to succeed. So I don't want people to live in fear. As for birthright citizens, that would be yet another, bridge even farther. I think it's not beyond this president to want to, for example, deport what he called homegrowns, by which he meant native U.S. citizens committed crimes or sentenced for crimes, and he said he'd deport them. I think there's a risk, and I think this is a slippery slope. And of course, the birthright citizenship executive order purporting to limit who could be claiming a birthright citizenship is another example of how being born in the U.S. does not guarantee you safety. I'll be clear, I don't think we're there yet. I'm not living in fear as a native-born U.S. citizen, but I've got my eye on this because I think that's the goal, destabilize everyone's status.
Let's also just touch upon what limitations, when we say open borders, what do you, and you say you're not for open borders.
Yeah.
What does open borders mean in that context? And what limitations do you think should exist on immigration and why? And then I do want to cover a couple of these.
I was going to say in 30 seconds.
Eras.
I'll just say no one, that certainly no political, no president, Democrat or Republican, is for open borders or ever has been in any recent history.
But when we say open borders, do we just mean no borders?
Yeah.
Or I mean, like, what constitutes open borders? Is it do European countries have open borders with each other?
I think the most extreme version of open borders is what we have between our states, right? Between the state of Virginia and its neighbors, between European countries, although I don't think they're as open as they used to be or were trying to be when they formed the European Union. I don't show a passport when I cross state lines as an American living in the United States. That's what the most extreme version of open borders is. It works great, by the way, in the United States, between our states. But no, I don't think we should have that as a policy, and nor has it been the policy of any president, Democrat or Republican. And I just use that, I make that point to say having limits on immigration makes sense. And they're something we should discuss as a nation. That's not the same as taking away citizenship or deporting people who are here legally or who have a right at least to be heard before they're deported. And so those are the distinctions I'm drawing. You asked about what our immigration policy should be. That is a tough question, and I wish Congress would grapple with it. That's where, that's the body that should be considering this.
Without a doubt. I'm just curious in the sense of like when we talk about there should be limitations on immigration. I mean, I think one of the problems that we have right now is that there has been very little articulated about what an immigration policy would look like that is immigrant positive, if you will, which ostensibly a significant portion of the country, if not the majority, frankly, hold, but we don't see that being articulated by, as far as I can tell, the Democratic Party, the opposition party here. There is more of a, well, the Republicans are extreme, but there's no positive. So I'm just curious, when you say limitation, like what does that look like?
Yeah. So there's a couple different changes that if, I were immigration czar or a member of Congress who could start this conversation, I would say we should do. One is we have got to expand the number of visas available for those who want to work and have skills to work in the United States. Our number was set in 1990 at 140,000 employment visas. 1990 was before the internet, and our country, of course, has grown enormously since then, and our economy has changed. That is just an unrealistic number. We need more unskilled workers. Over half the people who harvest our crops are undocumented immigrants. We would starve without them. Our food prices would rise without them. We need more legal ways for those people to come. So that's where the conversation should start. We should have more employment-based visas. And I'll add, I'm really frustrated by the hypocrisy because the same people who oppose immigration, who refuse to allow expansion of these numbers, and the same politicians who do this also live in states with enormous numbers of undocumented immigrants being employed by Americans. 5% of the working population in Texas is undocumented. They're employed by U.S. citizens in Texas who are violating immigration laws, but those U.S. citizens never face the consequences. So they both bemoan undocumented immigration and benefit economically from undocumented immigrants. We should legalize those immigrants by providing work visas and letting them come legally. And the flip side is I think we need to fix our asylum system. We needed to move people through much faster, allow them in or not. Right now, asylum had become, or under Biden, a way for people to come and work. They were needed, they were benefiting our economy, but that's not the way to do it.
Well, you mentioned the business owners too and the exploitative labor piece of this, and I think that doesn't get discussed enough. How someone's status with immigration can be used by a boss as leverage against that worker, and in part the lack of progress that we're talking about in Congress, I would argue is because of that, because this is like a sub labor, this is the folks that are most susceptible to wage theft. And you can have a boss say, you want to speak up a little bit about unsafe work conditions? Well, we can deport you. So my question then is do visas solve that problem? Or would citizenship and more blanket amnesty solve that problem? Like, say, if you're going to work if American companies want to hire people, well, they can't, or put some protections in place so that can't happen, for example.
Yeah, I think that protections in place so that doesn't happen. What you just described, there's lots of empirical evidence that is what happens. That is, employers look the other way, hire undocumented immigrants knowing they're undocumented, and then the minute the undocumented immigrant complains about dangerous workplace conditions or below minimum wage salary, then suddenly they report them to the immigration officials. So one way to stop that is to say, look, if an employee has been abused by an employer, then we're not going to, let the employer off the hook. They're going to have to pay the fines or suffer the costs, in some cases going to jail for the heads of companies that know this is happening. So that's a disincentive to violate immigration law if it were ever enforced. And then secondly, to give workers that speak up about unsafe work conditions protection from being deported if they're actually trying to protect the workplace. And I should add that when undocumented workers face unsafe work conditions, that means the U.S. citizens working alongside them do too. And so if you don't have any sympathy for the immigrant, I hope you do. But if you don't, then have sympathy for the U.S. citizen worker who faces similar dangers in that workplace. There's no perfect solution. There's no easy solution. I certainly don't have an easy solution, but we're not even trying to get to these solutions, certainly not in Congress. And that's what's frustrating.
I guess the last big push was during, presumably, I think, Biden offered something that never got taken up. And and ended up, frankly, both the supposedly sweetener in there ended up being the only thing that sort of I think survived that process, which is more often than not the case. That being, mass deportations or assaults on, or trying to keep people out. And I don't know if the Democrats will have learned. It has same thing happened under Obama, that strategy doesn't seem to work. As a political matter. But let's go look at, there's a couple of stories in the context of your book that I found really I was surprised about. I did not know, and that at one point women could be denaturalized if they married a foreign person, like their own citizenship could be put in jeopardy. You write about Sylvia Pankhurst and Ethel Coop McKenzie.
Yeah.
Tell us that and explain to us what that illustrates about our citizenship question.
Yeah, Ethel McKenzie is such an amazing story, and one I was shocked to learn as well. She was fighting for the right of women to vote in California before women got the right to vote in the U.S. Constitution. And that fight was intense in California. Women won the right to vote in California by a slim margin through efforts of women like her who fought so hard to get men had to vote for it in California. And then she goes to cast her vote in the first election in which she's permitted to as a woman in California. And she's barred from voting because she married a non-citizen. She married a Scottish tenor. They were this socially adored couple. They commanded the society pages of the San Francisco newspaper. She was a wealthy heiress, and she used the political power that she got from that media attention to make this an issue and said, of course I should be allowed to vote. I'm a citizen. I shouldn't be allowed to lose my citizenship. There's a federal law that said I lose my citizenship by marrying a non-citizen, but that violates my rights under the 14th Amendment's birthright citizenship provision. And she took that case to the Supreme Court in I think it was 15, and she lost 9-0. And the court kind of chided her and said, well, if you married a non-citizen, that's the consequence. Same thing happened in Congress when you tried to change it in Congress. Women fought for this. But then, lo and behold, women got the right to vote in our Constitution in 1920. And suddenly Congress is changing its tune. That law got repealed, although not immediately, and it excluded certain racial groups, like women who married Asian men, who were barred from naturalizing non-citizen Asian men. So the history of that really is the history of our nation's fight over citizenship and who belongs. It's fascinating.
It really is. I had no knowledge of that whatsoever. Let's also, maybe let's just start with Dred Scott too, just to remind people what this dynamic was. And of course, everything that we saw in the Reconstruction amendments were designed to sort of address Dred Scott to the extent that the politics would allow at that time, I guess. But just remind us of Dred Scott.
Yes, and I say, in addition to it being an important part of the book, You Are Not American, it's also the topic of my future book on birthright citizenship. So I'm steeped in Dred Scott. Dred and Harriet Scott were an enslaved couple. They had 2 young daughters, and they very much feared the family being sold apart and separated, which is why they filed a lawsuit. They claimed to be free, as in fact the law supported that claim because they'd been brought into free territory by their enslaver. And they also had to, in order to get into court, assert that they were U.S. citizens. And that had been a deeply contested question. Who was a citizen? There's no definition in the U.S. Constitution before we added birthright citizenship in the 14th Amendment in 1868. So they brought their case to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled against them on every front, said you're not free, and also you're not citizens. And they said, no Black person, slave or free, could ever be a citizen. And then the court went further. Chief Justice Taney, writing for the court, said, anyone who's of an inferior or subordinate class can't be a citizen. And I think that's been overlooked for too long. Who would be inferior and subordinate for him? We've seen in his jurisprudence, and others thought this way, anyone of any other race other than white, anyone who wasn't Christian should not be an American, in the view of people like Chief Justice Taney. And then, of course, we had the Civil War, the Reconstruction Amendments, the first sentence of the 14th Amendment overruled Dred Scott, rectified this error, and said all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens. And it's clear from the debates in the Reconstruction Congress, it was intended to overrule Dred Scott, it was intended to give citizenship to the newly freed slaves, and it was intended to integrate the children of immigrants into the United States. Chinese immigrants had been arriving on the West Coast in large numbers in the 40s and 50s. They were a group that was being vilified at the time. And the Reconstruction Congress, there were debates. Do we need to include the children of Chinese immigrants and those like them? And the answer was, yes, we did. Clearly stated out loud. So if you're an originalist, you should be comfortable with the idea that the birthright citizenship provision of the Constitution applies far beyond Dred Scott, and overruling Dred Scott as it held for that slaves were not citizens. And I add that because the current position of the current administration, the Trump administration in court, is that the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause applies only to give citizenship to the freed slaves and no one else.
This is an odd, maybe a little off topic, but how does two slaves or would-be freed slaves bring a case at that time to the Supreme Court? Was this like, I mean, were there abolitionists who were, had found essentially the Dred Scott and said, like, we're going to essentially marshal your case through the courts, or how did that work?
Yeah, I love that question because I am fascinated by the family, the Scott family. And while, of course, we don't have we don't have as many records of them as any historian would like, I'll say we know enough to know they were the agents of their own story. They pursued this case, particularly Harriet Scott. She was the one who was more valuable to the family that enslaved her, and she was afraid for the children, their daughters, who could easily be sold away from them. So they instigated this lawsuit. Now, they had to find a white establishment lawyer to bring the case, right? No, they themselves were not literate and not lawyers, obviously. So they did find someone to bring this case on their behalf. But they were, one, working to pay the fees. They didn't just get the help of pro bono lawyers. They actually paid for their lawsuit, at least in part themselves. They found allies who supported them along the way, and they knew their rights. It was actually very clear when they started the lawsuit that because they'd been brought into free territory by their enslaver, they were free. And slaves did learn about their legal rights and did pursue them in courts. And in this interesting legalistic culture, we had this evil thing of slavery, and yet there were lawyers and judges who would enforce the rules even in slave states, and they would declare that slaves were free. About 40% of the slaves who filed lawsuits were eventually prevailed in the Missouri courts, and Missouri was a slave state. So they began this lawsuit very intentionally to protect their family, and they fought it for 11 years. And while they lost in the Supreme Court, I want to add the postscript that they eventually prevailed in the sense that the press and the outrage was so strong that they were then freed, and their family lived in freedom for the last few years of Dred Scott's life in St. Louis.
Oh, that's fascinating. I mean, that's to just bring a case that will go that far in general, rather challenging, never mind being, sort of like intentionally kept illiterate for that. Let's go, let's jump forward to the Operation Wetback, because there's just a couple of, I think, things that, people aren't quite familiar with. And then maybe one other topic. But tell us about Operation Wetback.
Yeah, so in addition to these other examples of citizenship stripping, from Dred Scott to Ethel Mackenzie, the suffragist who lost her citizenship for marrying a non-citizen, and that was one interlude, we then saw in the 1930s and then again in the 1950s, they called them repatriations of Mexican families. But I'm putting the word repatriation in scare quotes because many of the people that were sent to Mexico from the United States had never actually lived in Mexico. So they weren't being repatriated anywhere. They were being relocated. The 1930s, it was, of course, a reaction to the Great Depression. The idea was they're taking our jobs, they being Mexican immigrants and their children and grandchildren. Of course, the view of some of these people were, the border moved, we didn't move. And also they'd come legally and been embraced initially. So this was extraordinarily coercive at times, violent at times, where families in the midst of this Great Depression were pushed out of the United States. And then it happened again in the 1950s. That's Operation Wetback, is the slur used to describe it by the government in these mass roundups. They would gather people in parks and load them onto buses and put them in camps and then deport them. There were many people U.S. born who were included mistakenly, some of them as children of parents who were being deported, some mistakenly included. There wasn't really any kind of due process. This is not an example we want to repeat, of course, today, although President Trump has said at times that he thought this was a good move that President Eisenhower made. So that's the story I tell. I tell the story of two people that actually made their way back into the U.S., both born who were wrongly deported and made their way back, which was difficult to do, and then made lives in the United States and then testified about their experience before the California State Senate.
I mean, it definitely feels like we're reliving that. There are reports that dozens of people have been basically disappeared out of Alcatraz, and we know this is ongoing. All right. Lastly, I'm curious about Fritz Julius Kuhn and the German American Bund, because we're also seeing the use of like this construct of the enemy within as a fig leaf to try and depose people. We had, Secretary of State basically saying, like, if you criticize our policy towards Israel or really for any other reason, we can deport you. Just recount for us that era.
Yeah, so that era was fascinating because, again, this reason I wrote the book is that I think the stories of the individuals involved are fascinating, and they give a bigger picture of what was going on in the United States. So Fritz Julius Kuhn was known as the American Führer. He led the German American Bund, which was not always and initially pro-Nazi and pro-Hitler, but was under Kuhn's leadership. And I pair his story with that of an incarcerated Japanese American born in the U.S., so U.S. citizen, but of Japanese descent, man who was incarcerated in one of those, they called them at the time concentration camps that the U.S. set up for Japanese immigrants and U.S. citizens of Japanese descent. And then he voluntarily left the U.S. at the end of the war. He was done with the nation that had decided to incarcerate him and not treat him as a loyal American. So I pair those two stories. And Kuhn is interesting because he led the German American Bund. He was virulently anti-Semitic, virulently pro-Hitler. He held a rally in Madison Square Garden attended by tens of thousands of people. There were plenty of people who supported him. But of course, we went to war with Germany. And so he was a naturalized U.S. citizen. He lied about his history. He'd committed crimes in Germany he lied about. And he was an uncomfortable person for the U.S. government to have around. So they held a trial. He lost his citizenship. He was deported to Germany. But after a trial, unlike all the Japanese Americans and Japanese immigrants in concentration camps at the time. And interestingly enough, he begged to get his U.S. citizenship back. While he was in the U.S., he said, I'm a German and Germans are German no matter, what citizenship they have. And that's my first allegiance. But he regretted taking that position and tried to come back to the U.S. unsuccessfully.
They're cowards all back then, too. Interesting.
Yeah, his take on it was, I'm all pro-Hitler and I'm German to the core until, Germany lost the war. I'm American.
Some things never change.
But even in that context, we were far harsher based upon racial lines as opposed to some other the assessment of how much of an enemy theoretically these people were relative to their nationality.
Yeah. So, I mean, the story of this book is the story of citizenship stripping, and 90% of the stories, the citizenship stripping is based on race. There is some ideological examples. Emma Goldman, who was an anarchist, lost her citizenship. She was white. We saw some labor leaders who were white in the Cold War era lose their citizenship for their speech. So that certainly happened, and something always keep an eye on because that's also antithetical to our values. But Kuhn's a good example. He lost his citizenship, but he did so after a full hearing before a federal judge. He didn't get this treatment that the Japanese Americans en masse got, as we just assume you're disloyal because of your blood, was what the government said, and incarcerated them. So I paired the two groups differently, and I think rightly so. The treatment that Julius Kuhn got was correct. He needed a trial before he could be deported. But I also think he was both supporting Hitler and had lied about his past and had committed crimes that justified his denaturalization after a full hearing to establish that before court.
Lastly, when you say antithetical to our values, how do we know? I mean, because I think this is an important thing for, I think, people to engage with at this point, because so much of the what 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago was supposedly understood. We could say this is antithetical to our American values, and that, that would suffice. But we're in an era where I think those underlying values are in dispute. So what is, I suspect you and I agree, but I'm curious as what are the basis of those values?
Yeah. So first of all, I hear you that I think we're currently in a period of contesting what our values are, but I feel very confident in the rock solid foundations of the values that I'm citing. So they come from the Declaration of Independence. They come from the language of the Constitution as amended by the Reconstruction Amendments, which brought it in line with the Declaration of Independence. And here's those values that I see. First of all, of course, we have the First Amendment, which claims freedom of speech, where the government can't penalize speech. So to the degree that people are being deported, losing citizenship based on speech, that's antithetical to that First Amendment in our Constitution as initially enshrined there, a value we've cared about throughout our nation's history. Second, of course, the very idea of declaring independence from Great Britain, from claiming we are our own country, that we, the people, lead. Not the government is chosen by the people with the consent of the people. We do not pick people based on their hereditary status, and we are all equal. All men are created equal. And of course, our Constitution prohibits things like titles of nobility or penalties based on corruption of blood. We don't punish the child for the sins of the father. These are all enshrined in our Constitution. As a constitutional lawyer and law professor, I teach these. I litigate about these. These are not contested, that those are the founding values. And to say to somebody, well, you're not a citizen because your parent did something that we think was illegal, or your grandparent or your great-grandparent, or we're going to remove you from the U.S. because your speech criticizes our government. That is, I think, very clearly antithetical to those founding values. And yeah, we're fighting about them now, but I hope we'll get back there. And I rest on my view that those are the founding values of our nation, and we have to keep fighting for them.
Amanda Frost, professor of immigration and citizenship law at the University of Virginia, author of You Are Not American: Citizenship Stripping from Dred Scott to Dreamers, and the forthcoming book on naturalized citizen or denaturalized. I guess it's in flux, perhaps. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, folks. That is the end of our free half of our program today. And we will move into the fun half. Although someone suggested, what was it, on Friday? The done half, because we're cooked.
It's a little fatalist.
Yeah, I'm not ready for that. So we'll still continue with the fun half. And in the fun half, we're going to examine the political leadership at this time that represents the opposition party.
Also, we might get into the big wrestling event that happened in Arizona. Oh, you mean, actually, sorry, it was a funeral.
Yeah, okay. I mean, where is the...
Are we still talking about that?
I don't have my... It was, yes. I have to say, Donald Trump's performance, and I do mean performance, was fantastic. He really can dance.
Oh, yeah.
We will talk about that.
Good time.
the spectacle, in Arizona. We'll also, we got a lot of stories. Oh, Trump wants to, I mentioned this on Friday, but it seems to be getting, like they're pretty serious about going in and reoccupying Afghanistan.
Oh, the anti-war ticket.
We left a bunch of beautiful tanks.
Too many tanks.
Beautiful tanks back.
I dropped a contact lens in Bagram and really wanted to get there.
You know, we just don't have enough tanks in America. So we have to recycle them.
Somebody told me there was a P-tape flying buried in Bagram, so we're going to retake that base. We will maybe show a couple of hits from the TPUSA event in Arizona. I mean, we've got a lot of stuff. I don't know what to tell you. And we're only 6 days away now, or 8 days away from a government shutdown. And be rest assured, Chuck Schumer, desperate to avoid a government shutdown, willing to do anything. We will talk about that and more. Just a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can help this show survive and thrive by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only get the free show, but you also get the fun half. You get the free show free of commercials. I want to thank our members. It is very helpful and comforting at a time like this where, you know, you get a little, there's a little bit of anxiety associated with doing this.
TikTok was just bought up by a bunch of pro-Trump oligarchs. Like, we don't know what the future is, I think, for online media.
They're already purging a lot of pro-Palestinian anti-genocide voices from TikTok. And not to mention, like, there's a lot of talk out there about, lunatics who are interested in, trying to silence various people in various ways. So it is with much appreciation that we have for our members who make this show possible every day, and, our viewers and listeners. I met somebody at a rest stop in Massachusetts.
Right.
Who's a listener to the show. And that was nice. It was, I was headed to a funeral, but it was still nice. But much appreciated. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, hot chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Matt left Reckoning.
Left Reckoning. I did a short reading series on Tony Jutt's review of the Mearsheimer-Walt essay on the Israel lobby that came out in the mid-2000s, so people can
What did he say about that?
He basically said that people that were dismissing it as anti-Semitic were obscuring an important conversation on policy in America, and it might have bad consequences down the line. And lo and behold,
who knew?
Crazy. Also, Devin O'Shea, we're talking about Vineland, a really great Thomas Pynchon novel, which apparently inspired a new
I'm seeing
Tiana
it in 70
Taylor.
millimeter on Saturday.
Upcoming movie. What's it called actually? The
One Battle After Another. I hear it's very loose. So
the
I'm
character
gonna read
names aren't the same, so
too.
I'm curious to see how close it follows the plot. But the Pynchon novel that came out in 1990 and talks about sort of the right-wing reaction to the 60s and 70s. It couldn't be a better time to come out with a movie based on that book. One of the more accessible Pynchon novels. So that'll be tomorrow at 7 o'clock Eastern. Subscribe to us on YouTube. We're like 1,000 short of 50,000, so subscribe to us.
Quick break. Fun half.